Hello and welcome back. I'm delighted to be joined by Dave McPherson today. Dave, hello, how are you doing?
Great, thanks. Yeah, and fantastic to be here. Thanks for the invite.
No problem at all. It's well deserved. Right, without further ado, I'm going to hand the mic over to you for a few minutes. Tell us about yourself.
That's the question, isn't it? Where to go from there? So thanks, Peter. So I guess it's for me personally, this obviously is about health and safety, so I'm going to keep it sort of fairly specific and significant to that. I was a fitness instructor for many years. I was in the fitness industry as a personal trainer for 18 odd years. And I decided to have a bit of a career change. Mid-30s, I needed a proper job, as my wife would call it. My wife's an accountant, and we always joke that she was the one who worked, and I was just playing around for a living. But I've always been fascinated with engineering. I've always had a real sort of interest in how things work and how things are built. And I was quite interested in that from an early stage. But I'm dyslexic, and I left school when I was 14. I had a real rough time of it at school. And one of the key sort of things around that was how dyslexia affected me. It wasn't really particularly well known when I was at school, and it certainly wasn't particularly well managed anyway. And having battled from quite young to impress upon people that I wasn't simply lazy, I was genuinely challenged with things, and would often get, "Are you stupid?" or "Are you thick?" or something, or called cloth ears if I wasn't looking like I was paying attention. But actually it was just brain doesn't work in the same way. And so I kind of shied away from the academic route for a long time. And it wasn't really until getting back into construction industry that I felt that was something that was accessible. Again, I've got a real interest, like I said, in engineering and how things work. And it took getting into the construction industry to sort of make me passionate about exploring education. And I've got some great people around me who help with that. So I think outside of work, the thing that I'm most passionate about, I guess, is helping other people who have perhaps shared similar struggles that I did in the past. So very privileged to know some fantastic people who've helped me out get through some of the challenges I've had. And if I have the privilege and the opportunity to pass some of that on, then it's exactly that. It's a wonderful privilege.
That's amazing. Great story, great backstory, which leads very nicely into the next question. You've kind of alluded to it in your previous answer, but why was it safety, health, and environment? Because that's kind of your title that you hold at the moment. Why was it that you got into specifically?
Yes, it's actually quite a good story. So for me, anyway, I guess I lived it. So I genuinely got into health and safety by accident. I wanted to explore engineering. Having not had any qualifications, I found it really, really hard to get into, and couldn't get a job without a qualification, but I couldn't enroll on the qualification without already having a job in engineering. It was like... as I sort of alluded to before, my wife gave me a gentle nudge to jump straight into something, and I found an opportunity to join a construction site as a labourer. It actually ended up being like an industrial cleaning role. It was on an enormous power station build, and this site was huge. And I was looking after a small team of cleaners. So there was me and there was a few other cleaners. And it was just fascinating to me when we got onto site how many different things there were. Now, if you imagine, if you will, I've been cooped up in a gym for 18 years at this point. You know, hadn't really seen much of other trades and opportunities and what sort of things go on out in the real world. And yet, the interesting thing about health and safety is that we all become desensitized to risk over time. The way our brains work to block out things that we perhaps don't need to process as part of our standard functioning means that if we're exposed to a particular environment over a long period of time, we'll naturally stop recognizing the things that become normal. Well, it was really interesting to me. There was a young lad walked straight in front of this 600-ton crawler crane. And some people had some, let's say, less than savoury things to say about this young lad, and were quite keen to pin the blame on him for not having followed the site rules and having done various things that he shouldn't have done. Well, for me, it was slightly different. I thought it was interesting how that situation had taken place in the first place, and I felt that we could have done something better to make sure that people don't think that that's something that they could do, to really reinforce and to understand how that interplay between humans and the environment that we're in works. So that kind of sparked my interest, and just spotting things that perhaps we need to think about in a different way. And I guess not coming from a traditional construction background, I didn't have that same acceptance of the standard way of doing things. So I guess I was naturally more inquisitive than someone who perhaps has been in that environment for a long period of time, who may not necessarily notice those things because they just become part of the background. Whereas it was obvious to me that some of those things weren't correct. And that, I guess, was the starting foundation. And I was asked, I think, 3 times whether or not I had my NEBOSH, where, for those of you not aware of that, it's for me, it was a ridiculously challenging qualification. I genuinely thought my head was going to explode while I was trying to do that. But I'd been asked once, and I didn't know anything about it. So I then went and found out what this qualification was. A couple of months later, I was asked again, and someone said, "Oh, well, that's a shame, because if you'd have had that qualification, we would have liked to take you on as our health and safety advisor." I made the decision then and there that actually I wasn't going to be asked a third time. That at least if I was asked a third time, I would have already started the ball rolling with working towards that sort of qualification.
Yeah. Going back to that qualification, it's all about starting that process. That's the hardest thing to do is start something. So, and it seems like you've done that since you got a proper job, so to speak. Don't really like that phrase, but let's use it because you got a proper job. It's like you started the qualification, etc., and that really moved things for you. One question moving on from initial roles and gaining that qualification is fostering a culture of health and safety and well-being when it's not the top priority, when people don't go to work to look out for things. They're there to do a particular function, if you like. How do you foster that kind of culture with health, safety and well-being being at the actual heart of it?
I think that's a great question, and for me, the real key here is culture is all about people and how people respond in a given environment, and how people behave together collectively as an agreement of this is the way that we do things. And for me, to get that, it's all about buy-in. So it's all about people collectively coming together and agreeing that that's the way that we will operate given any given particular set of circumstances. So for that to be effective, it has to be based around value and the value that people place on a particular methodology or agreement or principle or policy or procedure. It all has to be born from a sense of value that's placed on that. Because we generally tend to do things that we understand the value of doing, and not do things that we don't understand or agree with the value of doing. And I think for me, that's how my career previously really helped with this. And I'll be honest, when I first started in health and safety, I had a massive amount of imposter syndrome. And I think the reason for that is because I was surrounded by people who've been in the industry for 15, 20, 30, 40 years. And who was I to give any sort of advice or instruction as to what they should be doing? But actually, at the core, it's all about people. And having worked with people from an enormous background, a variety of skills, abilities, education, social standing, all those different things that have an enormous variety on the way people perceive value. And so what that enabled me to do is connect with people on a level that was relevant to their experience, and to truly get to understand what it was that they valued and what it was that they didn't value about policies and procedures. And so by understanding that first, I could then concentrate on either enhancing an awareness of the value that a thing had, or adapting a system so that it did actually provide value. And that's the key. We really are evolving our standards and policies and procedures all the time to ensure that we're in line with industry best practice, new and emergent thinking. And in order to do that effectively, it's about having real meaningful engagement with the people that we are responsible for that culture. So how do we foster a culture? Really simply, by truly developing meaningful engagement with our workforce. And that comes, I think, from a position of respect, respecting people's their view on something and their own experience, and that they may have a different set of values that they place on something compared to us. So if we first seek to understand the position of value that they place on a particular item, we can then, I think, have a much more meaningful engagement, which then allows us to get that collective buy-in and reach a position where we agree on the value of conducting ourselves in a particular way. And that's what it's all about. I mean, we can try and impose policies and procedures on people, but I think we can all guess how effective that is the second our backs are turned.
Yeah, absolutely. It brings me nicely onto my next question. Really, it's more of a follow-up to what you were saying about the culture there and fostering that type of culture and not enforcing something. But during your career, you've won you won an award back in 2021 for your work. You've seen transformational and cultural changes in what you've been doing. When it comes to things like that, if we were going to start afresh, or you were to land into a company which has been around for quite a while, is there a stage process you go through? Is it fluid, or does it depend on the organization, where they are in that process, and the industry itself?
Yeah, so everything is all about context.
Okay.
And again, I would come back to that. I think for me, a key, pivotal, crucial element that can often be missing is to first truly understand the situation. So I think coming from a position of humility and respect for the amazing work that people do affords me an opportunity to really, truly, first of all, show that respect and try to understand the position that those people find themselves in, and the circumstances within which we operate. So what are the constraints? What are the challenges? What are the difficulties that people are experiencing? And what can I do to offer support and perhaps some solutions to overcome some of those meaningful challenges? And not try... You don't have a doctor phone you up and say, right, I think you should take these pills. First we have to understand what's the symptoms, what have you been experiencing, what's the history. Once we've diagnosed what the actual problem is, then we can start offering solutions. And I think all too often we can get quite into the trap of thinking that we know best and come charging in with our solutions without first understanding whether or not that actually fits.
Okay.
So yeah, that for me is probably the most important. It's coming from this position of understanding and respect.
Okay, so understanding and respect. I was going to move on to the classic cutting corners, someone that health and safety, that typical kind of response that when it springs to mind, the old school health and safety and all that kind of stuff. You know, I'm not listening to that. I'm not going to fall foul of walking in front of a 600-ton crane. Only idiots do that, and then you're the idiot that does it. But I don't want to go down that route. What I want to ask is to get a bit more into the psychology of it. And is it a case, from what you've said in your previous answers, that it's almost like that social proof? So you get one or two on board, and then 3 or 4 follow, and then it almost has its own growth, and you're not necessarily having to push that. You're just guiding it in the right direction, because as more people realize that it's the right thing to do, the more people come on board, regardless how reluctant they might have previously been.
That's a really good question. I'll be honest. I think that wildly depends on individuals and our own willingness to engage or otherwise. But what I would say is that by far and away, my experience has been this. Most people, I would say actually probably everyone that I've ever worked with, came to work for the intention of performing their job and did not come to work with the intention to be injured. I'm not saying that those people don't exist. There may be some people who go to work with the intention, but thankfully I haven't come across them. And so I think, first of all, understanding that is actually, I know it sounds a bit tongue-in-cheek and a bit cheesy, but that's really important, is to actually understand the nature of the challenge. And the nature of the challenge is that we always have conflicting objectives. And so it's understanding what the value is that's placed on those objectives, and what we can change and what we absolutely must not change. Provision first, then if necessary, policing or observation or supervision or whatever you want to call it, and then only after that, enforcement. I'm not saying enforcement doesn't have its place within health and safety. Of course it does. If someone deliberately puts somebody else at risk, then of course there should be consequences involved. But actually, like I said, those things are very rare. And actually, it's down to us to create environments where people don't feel inclined to cut corners. So for me, it's all about empowering people and providing them the correct environment, and providing all of us the correct environment to support doing things the right way, instead of encouraging that. And the example I'll give, if you haven't looked at this before, I was quite surprised actually. I only found out that it had a name a couple of weeks ago, and that's a desire path. And a desire path is the name for a path which is trodden to cut across. When sometimes you have an L-shaped pavement, and then you'll have a curved trodden path between those two. So it's easy to fall into the trap of saying, well, that person shouldn't have walked across that angle.
Yeah.
But then actually, if that's the sensible route that people should take, the question that we should be asking ourselves is, why did we just decide it was necessary to create a geometrical straight path, when we've known for hundreds, if not thousands of years, that people will naturally take the path of least resistance?
Yeah.
And so some very clever engineers now who actually, during design phases, run simulations through artificial intelligence that actually determine what those desire paths might be, and create some solutions with that in mind, which is fascinating to me.
That's fantastic. So a lot of what you've said up to that point there, the end point, which I'd like to elaborate on a little bit, is all about the people, and it will forever be about the people because that's who we're trying to keep safe. And like you said, they come to work to do a particular thing, not to think, how do I keep myself safe? Although that's an important part, that isn't, what they're brought in to do. So how can technology help us? You alluded to a little bit there, but is technology helping, and will it help in the future?
Well, yeah, I think technology has had a profound effect on all of us, and it will continue to do so at an exponential rate if our recent history can evidence that. And I really do believe that if we work with our people to understand what the challenges are that they are faced with on a day-to-day basis, and then we truly try to understand the nature of what that challenge is before we rush in with a technology-driven solution, which again is that prescribing drugs before we find out what the illness is. Doesn't really make a lot of sense, but we do it all the time. I think we're quite guilty, not as a company, but as a nation, that generally tends to be what we do. We find all these different solutions to problems that we don't actually have. So I think technology can be a wonderful thing if it's applied correctly. And there's loads of different examples of some absolutely fascinating emergent tech and existing technology that's being used in construction at the moment. I think as long as we remember our people first, and we work with our people to understand the nature of the real challenges that they face on a day-to-day basis, and then we work to solve those problems and concentrate our resources, then I think technology has a wonderful role to play in protecting our people and enhancing our workplace.
Fantastic. Right, David, I'm going to start wrapping this up, if you don't mind. Thank you so much for your time. Really, really interesting answers and so eloquently put. I can tell you've got a passion for what you do. So what does I was going to say, I was trying to lead into saying, is it personal training is the future, or are you going to go into gyms and show people the correct way to lift and the correct way to do their sprints and stuff like that? But I'm not going to ask you that. What I'm going to say is, what does the future hold for the award-winning Dave McPherson? How about that to end on a question?
That's it. Yeah, that's a great question. I'll try and keep this one relatively concise and to the point. Listen, I have such a privilege to be working with some of the industry's leading minds in overcoming a significant challenge that affects all of us, really, and that's underground services. Anyone who knows me knows that I won't stop talking about underground services. I'm truly passionate about protecting people from harm, and as I said, I'm working with a group of really talented people from all sorts of different sectors and disciplines, and what we're essentially doing is creating an open source competency framework which enables people at every single step of the process to understand what kind of competency they would need to protect underground services from damage during construction or other ground-breaking activities, and to protect people from harm that happens when an underground service is hit. So whether that's gas, water, electricity, or whether it's your broadband or your phone line, it's such a privilege to be involved in, and I'm so excited to see where this goes. It's something to sink my teeth into. I think probably for the next 3 to 5 years, it will definitely keep my hands full. Just to keep doing that. I'm one of these sad people who genuinely love my job. If I won the lottery tomorrow, I guarantee I would still come to work. How's that? So yeah, I really love it. Honestly, I'm like a little kid when I go to a construction site, watching all these fantastic operations going on. It never ceases to amaze me, and just being able to continue to do that, it's a real privilege and an honour, and I'm really excited to keep doing it.
Fantastic, Dave. Thank you so much for joining me. Really interesting. I enjoy talking to anybody that's got a passion for anything, because it's just so engaging, and that passion always rubs off, regardless of what that passion's for. So thank you so much for joining me. It's been an absolute pleasure.
You're welcome, and thanks for having me on the show. It's been a pleasure chatting to you, and thanks for the invite.